They complained that my fence was an eyesore and demanded I take it down, even though it was on my property and fully legal. So instead, I upgraded it, installed smart floodlights along the entire length. And guess what? Those lights are wired into the HOA's shared power grid. By the end of the month, their electricity bill shot up 40%, and suddenly my fence didn't bother them so much anymore. Let me be clear right from the start. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just want a little privacy. My house sits on a corner lot near the main entrance to the neighborhood. Every dog walker, jogger, and random delivery van had a direct line of sight into my backyard. So, after 6 months of watching people stroll past while I tried to enjoy a quiet coffee on my patio, I decided to do what most homeowners eventually do. I built a fence. Not some towering fortress, either. Just a clean, 6-foot cedar plank fence, stained neutral brown, properly spaced posts, and installed well within my property line. It matched at least 3 other fences I could see from my backyard. I even hired a professional to make sure it complied with city code and the basic HOA guidelines I'd reviewed when I moved in. I thought I was being reasonable. Apparently, reason and the HOA do not coexist. 2 weeks after the fence went up, I got my first notice. It came folded neatly inside a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door like a parking ticket. Notice of violation was stamped across the top in bold block letters. I opened it thinking maybe someone had misfiled something, a clerical error. But no, it said my fence was visually incompatible with the aesthetic character of the neighborhood and had not received prior design approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I blinked. Then I blinked again. Because, let's be honest, what aesthetic character were they talking about? Our neighborhood was a patchwork of contractor-grade homes in 5 different shades of beige. Most fences looked identical unless you squinted hard or had a measuring tape for eyes. Mine didn't stand out. It blended in. In fact, it looked better than half of them. Still, I followed protocol. I submitted an appeal with photos, measurements, and citations from the HOA's own guidelines, showing my fence height and style were perfectly compliant. I even included examples of nearly identical fences in the same subdivision. I thought, surely they'll look at the evidence and realize this was a mistake. Nope. 3 weeks later, I received the appeal rejection. The letter, signed by someone named Karen M., stated that while my fence may be structurally acceptable, it was aesthetic nonconforming and would need to be repainted in approved tones or removed entirely. Removed entirely, as in, take down a perfectly legal, professionally installed structure because it didn't look HOA enough. That's when the frustration kicked in. Not just because of the money I'd spent or the time I'd wasted jumping through hoops, but because it was clear this wasn't about the fence. It was about control, power, the need to flex over something that didn't actually matter just because they could, and I wasn't the only one feeling it. 2 neighbors came over that same week to say they'd received similar letters for things as petty as non-compliant mailbox paint and garden border height. Another said she got fined for leaving her trash bin on the curb 10 minutes too long. The HOA, it seemed, had become less about community and more about authority and enforcement without empathy. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because while walking back from the HOA drop box after submitting my second and final appeal, which I knew would be ignored, I passed by something I never paid much attention to before. The HOA utility shed. It sat tucked into the side of the community greenbelt, not far from my back fence. A beige metal box on a concrete pad, padlocked like Fort Knox, and surrounded by a few shrubs and a faded wooden sign that read, Whisper Glen HOA Utilities, Do Not Tamper. Beside it stood the HOA's proud little monument. A community welcome sign made of faux stone with soft uplighting at night, casting a gentle glow on the letters that read, Welcome to Whisper Glen, where neighbors thrive. But what caught my attention wasn't the sign itself. It was the power conduit. I followed it with my eyes from the base of the sign across the ground and up the post near the back of my fence into a subpanel box bolted to a shared access pole. A shared pole located entirely on my easement. I tilted my head. Then I got on my flashlight and looked closer. That subpanel wasn't just feeding the community sign. It powered the irrigation system, the path lights along the Greenbelt Trail, and yes, the HOA utility shed itself. All of it ran through one consolidated meter installed back when the development first broke ground, right on the edge of my property. Technically, it wasn't mine, but also wasn't theirs, not completely. I remembered from my deed that there was a shared utility clause, meaning I had a right to maintain or add to certain access lines as long as it didn't impede HOA operations or break safety codes. And that's when the idea sparked. If they were going to nitpick the look of my fence, I'd show them what aesthetics really looked like. Floodlights. Smart. Bright. Motion-triggered. Industrial strength, if necessary, but still within residential code. Placed strategically along the inside of my fence, but positioned just close enough to tie into that lovely shared power source. I wasn't going to damage anything. I wasn't going to touch their wires. I was simply going to light up my aesthetic violation in the most energy-consuming, legally sound way possible, and make sure it lit up their ledger right along with it. The fence was compliant. The lights would be compliant. And the bill? Well, that was going to be the real eyesore. Once I realized a shared electrical panel near my fence powered more than just a welcome sign, I turned from frustrated homeowner into focused strategist. I wasn't interested in some loud, obvious rebellion. No flamingos or inflatable unicorns. I wanted a revenge that was legal, quiet, and billable. So I started with research. First, I pulled my property documents and plat maps. The subpanel pole stood precisely on the border of a shared easement, which my deed recognized as co-managed for utility and safety infrastructure. The legal language allowed homeowners bordering the easement to contribute to and draw from established power or irrigation services, so long as said use does not disrupt designated systems or exceed individual load thresholds. Translation: as long as I didn't overload it, I could connect to it. Next, I called the city's zoning and utilities department. After a few transfers and some polite questions about property access, I confirmed the HOA held the power account, but the infrastructure itself was on easement property accessible to homeowners, meaning I could legally route low-draw devices, like outdoor lighting, as long as it stayed under residential code. So, I wasn't trespassing. I wasn't stealing power. I was participating. Now came the fun part: shopping. I picked up 6 industrial-grade smart floodlights designed for outdoor use. Waterproof, motion-triggered, and app-controlled. They weren't cheap, but they weren't outrageous either. I'd call it an investment in both home security and, let's say, municipal education. Each unit ran at about 38 watts. Not much on its own, but with all 6 firing up when triggered, it created a full glow effect down my back fence line. Like a prison yard perimeter beam, only stylish. Installation took a weekend. I mounted each light about 7 feet high, angled slightly downward toward my yard, but with enough dispersion to cast light across the shared path and greenbelt. I even included one angled subtly toward the HOA welcome sign. After all, if it was important enough to be lit, I figured it deserved a little backup illumination. The power routing was the trickiest part. I didn't hardwire directly into the HOA's junction box. That would have been illegal. Instead, I installed a plug-in low-draw battery relay that legally tapped the available line, capped at under 300 W. This meant the draw was minimal but cumulative. I tested the lights that evening. Motion activated, check. Delay timer, perfect. Brightness, oh yeah. Let's just say the raccoons, 2 houses down, blinked twice before retreating into the trees. And here's the thing, I didn't hide it. Everything was mounted cleanly, conduit concealed in paint match channels, with a QR code label that said Compliant Residential Safety Lighting, REF, Fire and Crime Prevention Code 9.14. That way, if Karen or anyone else came sniffing around, they'd scan the code and get a summary of state-mandated residential lighting allowances. It was airtight. The next few days were delicious. The first time the HOA noticed was during one of their 6 p.m. walking meetings. You know the ones. 2 or 3 board members strolling slowly, clipboards in hand, whispering about whose shrubs are getting wild. I was inside having dinner when the lights kicked on. I heard a sudden, startled shout, followed by the sound of someone bumping into a decorative boulder. I peeked out the window and caught Karen shielding her eyes, squinting up at my fence like it had come alive. The next morning, I got a note in my mailbox. This time it wasn't a violation, just a courtesy reminder that outdoor lighting should remain subtle and neighbor-friendly. I smiled. They couldn't even cite a specific rule. Because here's the kicker. According to HOA bylaws and municipal ordinance, any exterior lighting installed for the purpose of safety, surveillance, or crime deterrence is protected, especially along fence lines, pathways, or easements shared with community access points. Meaning, they couldn't touch it. The lights stayed. Better yet, I had them programmed to activate in escalating brightness cycles. The longer someone lingered on the shared path or approached the HOA shed, the brighter the lights grew, all while staying within legal decibel and wattage thresholds. But the best moment? When the HOA held their next community gathering at the welcome sign. It was an early evening meet and greet with finger foods, soft jazz, and folding chairs near the entry monument. As the sun began to set, they plugged in their usual ground lights, unaware that every time someone moved, my floodlights activated too. Guests started shielding their eyes. People joked about the new airport runway or asked if someone was expecting an alien landing. Karen approached me mid-event with that tight-lipped HOA smile. "Hi there. About your new lighting, it's quite powerful." "Thanks," I said. "Security is a priority." She nodded stiffly. "It's very, present." I try to match the HOA's aesthetic, I added. Clean lines, consistent spacing, full perimeter coverage. She didn't laugh, but I did, quietly when I got back inside. A week later, the HOA's treasurer sent out a community update with a little note at the bottom. "We are currently investigating a temporary increase in utility usage associated with shared access systems and lighting infrastructure. Homeowners may notice a slight rise in quarterly dues." Slight rise? The lights had triggered motion dozens of times per night. Every stray cat, every teenager cutting through the path, every HOA patrol. The estimated increase? 40% over their usual utility draw. And I hadn't broken a single rule. Neighbors started noticing, and not just the lights. The absurdity, the pettiness. One guy from across the street walked over one evening and said, "I heard they try to fine you for a fence." "That true?" "Yup." He pointed at the lights. Nice response. I just smiled. Had to stay compliant. He laughed, shook his head, and muttered, "I need to install a few of these myself." By the end of the month, 2 more fences in the neighborhood had motion lights. The HOA never said another word, because sometimes it's not about yelling louder. It's about lighting smarter. And watching the people who try to blindside you squint.b by the time the HOA got their quarterly utility bill, I was already 3 weeks in a phase 2 of my compliance lighting. Let's just say, the lights were performing beautifully. I had them dialed to a soft, idle glow in the early evenings, brightening in stages with every passerby. The sensors were so sensitive, they triggered when squirrels jumped the fence. By week 2, my backyard was unofficially known as the Whisper Glen Motion Disco by a few kids in the neighborhood. And somewhere deep in HOA headquarters, aka Karen's breakfast nook, the power bill came due. I didn't get to see the actual expression when she opened it, but I imagined it involved a dramatic gasp, a clatter of acrylic nails, and an immediate reply-all email with subject line, "Urgent. Outrageous usage spike." Because, as I later heard through the grapevine, the HOA's electricity bill had jumped nearly 40%. 40%. The welcome sign lighting, sprinkler timers, maintenance shed, and shared power conduits, all fed from that one humble subpanel perched next to my now illuminated fence line. The next day, I noticed them gathering, Karen, Brenda, the treasurer, and at least one clipboard-wielding board member. They stood near the HOA shed in broad daylight, squinting up at the lights like they'd just discovered aliens had moved in. Karen gestured. Brenda took notes. The clipboard person counted wires. One of them waved at my Ring camera. I waved back, remotely, from my kitchen app. Later that evening, I received a letter. Not a violation. Not even a warning. Just a very carefully worded inquiry. "We've noticed the recent addition of high-output lighting on your property and would like to request clarification as to the power source intended use, and maintenance schedule. As your fixtures appear to be adjacent to shared HOA infrastructure, we seek confirmation that installation complies with local code and neighborhood regulations. I read it twice, then poured a cup of coffee and typed out my response. Dear Whisper Glen HOA, thank you for your letter regarding the new lighting on my property. These fixtures were installed solely for residential security and visibility enhancement, in accordance with City Code 9.14, Section B, Residential Safety Lighting. As outlined in my deeds easement agreement, residents bordering shared infrastructure may draw low-voltage power for safety-related installations without prior board approval, provided total load remains within subpanel capacity. Given that my original fence was deemed aesthetic non-compliant, I selected fixtures that better aligned with the HOA's lighting palette and architectural language. Please let me know if you require a receipt for the LED warm white bulbs. Warm regards. My full name. I CC Brenda and Karen. And just for fun, the City Code Enforcement Office. 3 days later, I was told the HOA would be reassessing its lighting and infrastructure usage policies in the next meeting. The agenda, as leaked to me by a neighbor who attended these things for fun, included the item, excessive electricity draw from shared fixtures, resident installations. They wanted to fight it. They really did. But every time they looked at the rules, they hit a wall. Residential safety lighting was allowed. Smart floodlights weren't banned. And the easement agreement hadn't been updated in over 15 years, meaning they had no authority to charge me back or force removal without rewriting the entire infrastructure clause, which they couldn't do without a 75% vote from residents, which, as it turned out, they were never going to get. Because the residents? Oh, they were laughing. Quietly, of course. Behind closed doors. In hushed conversations by the mailbox. But laughing all the same. I heard it from the retired vet down the street. You really lit a fire under him. Just not the kind they expected. From a young couple 2 houses over. We checked our own fences. You think your model's on sale? Even Brenda, the treasurer, seemed oddly amused during her next walk through. She waved as she passed. I waved back. The lights flared just as she stepped onto the trail. She smiled and kept walking. Karen, however, wasn't smiling. Word was, she tried to file an internal complaint claiming intentional sabotage of shared HOA assets. But without proof of malice, it fell flat. After all, I hadn't damaged anything. I hadn't rerouted power. I hadn't even touched their hardware. I'd simply used the access available to me in a way they never expected. Legal, strategic, bright. The board held one more emergency session to debate options. I heard they tried to draft an amendment limiting lighting wattage within 10 feet of shared property, but City Code trumped it. They debated changing the power infrastructure entirely, a costly fantasy requiring permits, digging, and a $20,000 assessment no one would vote for. So they did the only thing left. They ate the bill. At the next quarterly update, a bland line item appeared in the newsletter. Due to seasonal utility variances and equipment upgrades, homeowners may notice a slight dues increase. Slight, right? But nobody questioned it too hard, because for once, people were too busy enjoying the show. The formerly invisible path by the Greenbelt was now well lit. Kids could ride scooters after dusk. Dog walkers felt safer. A few residents even asked if I could recommend a similar lighting system, but maybe a bit softer. I pointed them to the App Store, gave the model numbers, smiled, because the moment Karen declared my fence an eyesore, she gave me permission. Permission to redesign. Permission to illuminate. And when the lights came on, so did the neighborhood's sense of humor. It turns out, the best way to win isn't always to fight back with fists or forms. Sometimes, you just raise their bill. One LED at a time. That IT didn't happen overnight. But by the time the next Whisper Glen HOA quarterly newsletter came out, the tone had shifted from condescending micromanagement to quiet damage control. Right there on page 2, under the usual calendar of pool hours and pet cleanup reminders, was a short, unobtrusive paragraph. Fence policy update. In response to homeowner feedback and changing neighborhood needs, the Architectural Committee has voted to expand acceptable materials and finishes for privacy fencing. Height and placement restrictions remain unchanged. For questions, please contact the ARC. Translation: we give up. Build your fences and stop sending us letters. There was no mention of my name, no formal apology. But anyone who'd been following the saga knew exactly what that policy revision meant. They backed off. Quietly. Grudgingly. Completely. Even better, the lights stayed up. In fact, not only did they stay, they became a feature. At first, the HOA tried to ignore them. But with no legal leverage, no community support for changes, and a general mood of let it go already, the board just absorbed it. Every time the floodlights triggered at dusk, they paid for it. And every time the bill arrived, I imagined a soft groan echoing through Karen's now vacant chair at the board table. Yes, Karen stepped down. Officially, she cited time commitments and a need to focus on family. Unofficially, well, word travels fast in a neighborhood where the most exciting drama in years involved motion sensors and energy bills. A week after she left, I got a knock on the door. It was Brenda, the treasurer, clipboard in one hand and a half-smile on her face. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "Actually, I just wanted to ask what brand of lights you used. My husband wants to install a few along our side yard." I gave her the name. She wrote it down. And just before she walked away, she added, "For the record, this whole thing, it's the most peaceful the committee's been in months." She wasn't the only one who noticed. Little by little, new lights started popping up on fences all over the neighborhood. Softer ones, solar-powered in some cases, some decorative, some purely functional. But the old narrative that individuality was dangerous, that variation was offensive, started to crumble. People realized it's okay to express yourself a little. It's okay to want safety and style. It's okay to live in a neighborhood, not a gated simulation. The funniest part? My original fence, the aesthetic offense that started this whole drama, now blended in better than ever. Not because I changed it. I didn't touch it. But because more homeowners had started putting up fences of their own, and no two looked exactly alike anymore. Suddenly, variety wasn't threatening. It was normal. And as for the lights, well, the HOA still pays that extra utility cost. Quietly, without protest. They tried once, just once, to ask me to voluntarily disconnect. Not through a violation. Just a kindly worded suggestion tucked into a community feedback form. I ignored it. Because just like they wanted consistency in fence design, I wanted consistency in consequences. And every time those lights click on at night, they remind people that control without fairness eventually leads to a bill nobody wants to pay. These days, I walk through the neighborhood at night and see a dozen fences softly glowing in the dark. Each one quietly saying, "We see you. We learned from it. And we're not dimming down again." They wanted my fence to disappear. So I gave a spotlight. And the bill? That showed up on their side of the yard. The HOA tried to micromanage my property over aesthetic uniformity, without ever realizing they were wired into a system I understood better than they did. They saw a neutral fence and called it non-compliant. I saw a shared power grid and called it an opportunity. Sometimes you don't need to shout. You don't need to escalate. You just need to flip the right switch. Literally. The moment they called my fence an eyesore, they gave me the green light to improve it with motion sensors, smart bulbs, and enough LED wattage to make the neighborhood glow like a showroom. All legal, all safe, all illuminating the cost of their pettiness. In the end, they learned two things the hard way. 1, you can't dictate taste with a rule book. 2, if you push the wrong homeowner too far, they might just light up your whole infrastructure. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been fined for something completely ridiculous? Paint color, trash bin timing, fence material, lawn shade, or yes, garden gnomes? Tell me in the comments how you handled it, or how you'd flip the lights if you had the chance. Because sometimes the best way to respond to their nonsense is to show them the path. An LED,